Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the soft shadows of myth, somewhere between dream and memory, where moonlight filters through olive leaves and feathers drift quietly down ancient marble steps. You're not quite sure how you got here, but there you are, standing at the edge of a long abandoned temple in a grove so overgrown even the gods might have forgotten it was ever theirs. The air smells faintly of thyme and damp stone, and something rustles in the branches above. The temple's columns are cracked, vines winding around them like time itself trying to reclaim the story. You brush aside a few dusty leaves and step inside, careful not to trip on uneven tiles. Owl feathers litter the ground, dozens of them, small, gray, and soft, as if someone or something has been molting here for centuries. The moment you kneel to touch one, the breeze shifts. A warm, sleepy wind nudges the olive trees outside, and somewhere, an owl hoots, not menacingly, just curiously. It's the kind of place that feels heavy with stories, not the epic kind with heroes shouting and swords clashing, but the quieter kind, where one wrong prayer can change your whole species. And tonight, it's all about Athena. Yes, that Athena, the war goddess with the golden armor and the intense work ethic. But tonight, we're not talking about her greatest battles or her clever schemes. We're talking about that time she turned a teenage girl into an owl, allegedly for fun. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in a Greek myth. By the way, the rules are vague. The gods are temperamental, and if you're mortal, you're probably about to be turned into a shrub or something just for existing too loudly. Just a heads up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you drifting off in New York? Just waking up in Jakarta? Or pretending to sleep in Warsaw? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch lightly as you walk deeper into the ruins. You can almost hear whispered prayers bouncing off the old stone. This place once throbbed with ritual. Incense smoke curling upward, women singing slow, minor key hymns, olive oil dripping gently onto sacred flame. This was Athena's territory, after all. And the fact that it's so quiet now, so feather-strewn and forgotten, feels a little off. One column still holds a faint carving, an owl, perched awkwardly on a crescent moon. Its eyes are huge, blank, almost curious. It's not menacing. It's not wise. It's just watching. There's no plaque, no name, no myth etched in stone. Just a bird, lost in time. You settle onto a low slab that might have once been an offering table and let your eyes close halfway. The temperature drops slightly. The night deepens. You realize this isn't the beginning of the story. It's more like the memory of one. And if you listen hard enough, maybe the temple will remember it with you. Historians still argue whether this ruin was dedicated to Athena proper or to some regional echo of her, one of those localized versions the Greeks were oddly comfortable with. But local legend agrees on one detail. A girl came here a long time ago and never quite left. And if the feathers mean anything, she might still be here, watching, waiting, or just resting. You shift slightly, and a few tiny bones scatter near your foot. Probably just bird remains, nothing dramatic. Still, something about this place makes you want to whisper, as if the stones remember what voices once did to the air, and how prayers could change your fate or your form. You lean back, eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Somewhere overhead, a branch creaks. The owl hoots again, closer this time. You wonder who that girl was, what she wanted, and how a goddess as calculating as Athena decided to grant her the weirdest immortality imaginable. You'll get there. But for now, rest. Listen. The temple remembers. You step back into the night air, and the grove immediately hushes you. The olive tree nearest the temple, the one with a trunk like a braided old rope, leans just enough to suggest it's listening. A breeze passes through, soft as a yawn, and the leaves whisper together with that papery, rain on shells sound. You tilt your head, and because you're you try to make out actual words. It's almost like ASMR from a very patient plant. Shh. Shh. Keep walking. Keep watching. You do. Olive was Athena's signature. Not a spear, not a shield, but a tree that feeds, lights, heals, and doesn't make too much noise about it. In the old story, when the gods staged a municipal talent show to decide who would sponsor a little promontory called Athens, Poseidon struck the rock and gave a salt spring, or a warhorse, depending on the telling. And Athena planted the first olive. Historians still argue whether the earliest version promised a foaming spring or a stallion that could turn the tide of battle. But the civic judges favored shade and sandwiches over splashy theatrics. The olive won. You reach out and run your fingertips over a leaf's matte green surface. The underside is paler, almost silvery, as if the tree remembers moonlight even at noon. There's resin in the air, green, peppery, slightly bitter. You think about how many lamps this tree's ancestors must have fueled, how many quiet rooms were warmed by flame cups filled with olive oil. That's your mainstream fact for the evening in classical Athens. Olive oil wasn't a luxury garnish. It was an energy source. Homes, workshops, and shrines burned it, and the city hoarded it like soft gold. Prize amphorae at the Panathenaic Games brimmed with the stuff, sealed under black-figured goddesses, and winners hauled those jars home like walking, grinning bank accounts. But the tree has mischievous gossip, too. The quirky part: athletes used to oil themselves before competition, then scrape off the mix of oil, sweat, and dust with curved bronze scrapers called strigils. Apothecaries sold the scrapings, gloios, as a kind of medicinal goo. Imagine walking into a chemist and asking, Do you have anything in a vintage discus thrower? You do not buy any tonight. You have standards, and also a nose. The breeze freshens, and the leaves clatter a little louder, like polite applause. Owls like these trees. They like the edges, the places where field turns to grove, where the open sky meets a sheltered perch. And this grove offers all of it. An owl ghosting from one branch to another is practically invisible until it isn't. And then, with that blank, coin-bright stare, it is very visible indeed. You try to stare back with equal wisdom and only manage to look like you need glasses. Down the slope, the ground flattens into an old terrace where the sacred olives, Morii, were once counted and guarded. Even in a city known for debate, cutting a Moria olive was not up for discussion. It was a crime with heavy penalties. Officials inspected the groves, and farmers swore oaths to protect them. The law protected not just property, but presence. The idea that the goddess had roots here. Literal ones, braided into the earth. You let your feet find the terrace edge, toes over pebbles, and you listen again. The tree's whisper turns leafier, like pages turning. Secrets, you murmur, and the tree obliges, offering a history shaped in rustle and scent. Olive oil in hair, in bread, in wounds. Oil poured on stones to wake the god in them. Oil glimmering on a newborn skin. Oil honoring the dead. This is the gentle empire of Athena. Order, craft, the bright rationality of things that take time. She wasn't a goddess of storms. She was a goddess of outcomes, of plan, of practice, of patience. She would definitely have color-coded her calendar. There's another debate the scholars like. Whether the famous Athenian olive at the Acropolis, Athena's own tree, was a living continuation from a mythical first planting, or a carefully curated symbol replanted through the centuries to say, we still belong to her. Historians still argue whether the lineage was botanical fact or civic storytelling. But either way, the tree kept reappearing in the record after fires, wars, and rebuilds. Stubborn as a rumor and just as useful. A small joke falls into your lap like a leaf. If you had to pick a divine patron, a plant that gives you snacks, lamp fuel, and moisturizer is a decent package. You could do worse. Say, a sea god who keeps turning up with tidal surges and hoofed metaphors. The owl somewhere above utters a soft, descending note, which you interpret as agreement, or possibly bring back the moisturizer. And then, the olive drops a different kind of whisper. A name, Nyctimene, seems to come riding down the leaf stems. A syllable here, a syllable there, until you're certain the tree has just told you something it shouldn't. You picture a girl with night in her name, a face lit by the smallest of lamps, eyes swollen from weeping. You imagine her slipping into a grove like this one, wanting to be unseen, but needing someone to see her. In the oldest accounts, she's from Lesbos, and her story is a knot of shame and flight. Some later versions soften the knot into a ribbon. Others pull it tighter until it snaps. Historians still argue whether Nyctimene's tale first entered Athens as a local island legend, or as a moralizing import shaped by Roman retelling. The wind, for its part. Doesn't care. It carries the syllables anyway, as if names are seeds. You lean your back against the trunk, and the bark presses through your tunic like a map. It's ridged, spiraled, a lifetime of circles grown lopsided by storms and sun. In that slow, plant way. The tree seems to speak of time measured in olives and seasons. Blossom to berry, to press to jar, to lamp to soot. The temple behind you, with its owl carving, feels less like stone now, more like punctuation, an emphatic period at the end of a leafy sentence. A scrap of moonlight catches something wedged in a root. You kneel and tease out a sliver of fired clay, just a rim fragment, curved and blackened. You turn it in your fingers, and the surface glints with a ghost of glaze. It could be from a tiny lamp, the kind you fill with oil and tend carefully, a coin of light in a dark room. This is a small, grounded truth. The archaeology of night is often lamps and ashes. People come to the sacred places with the same needs: light, forgiveness, a moment alone, and leave traces that say, "We were here, quietly." You return the shard to its root niche. The owl moves again. You hear the breathy shudder of feathers and the soft knock of talons on bark. Somewhere, an olive drops and hits the ground with a tiny pluck, the least threatening sound in mythology. You grin in the dark. Not every omen has to be dramatic. Sometimes the sign is just snack later. And because your mind loves patterns, it lines up the olive and the owl and the girl in a row, like figurines on a mantle. Athena's tree. Athena's bird. A girl who becomes the bird under the tree of the goddess who reasons her way through everything. Until she doesn't. The story tightens a little more around you, comfortably, like a cloak. You're not trapped. You're held. Above, the leaves fuss softly, saying nothing and everything. You can almost translate it. Patience. Patience. We'll tell you, but you must walk. You must listen. You must understand the quiet logic that grows rings in wood and stitches daylight to dark. The tree saves its best secret for last, of course. That's how ancient things keep you coming back. You push away from the trunk, leaving a shallow warmth where your shoulder rested. As you step toward the deeper part of the grove, the owl glides ahead, a pale shrug of wings threading through the olive's shadow. You follow, smelling green and dust and the faintest hint of oil, like someone has just opened a fresh jar in the world's oldest kitchen. The leaves behind you lift and settle again, whispering, as if closing a book, and you feel, not for the first time, that you're walking into a story that the wind already knows by heart. The owl leads you deeper into the grove, not with flapping theatrics, but with the soundless efficiency of something that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. Its wings barely disturb the air. You follow, stepping lightly over roots and soft moss, until the trees thin and you find a clearing kissed by moonlight. It's the kind of place where myth and memory tend to settle for a while, like mist on a pond. In the middle of this clearing is a curious thing, a round stone with symbols half worn by time and footfalls. You kneel to examine it. The carvings form a kind of radiating spiral. Olive branches and tiny birds etched with obsessive repetition. This was no ordinary marker. Maybe a ceremonial stone, maybe a shrine floor, or maybe, just maybe, a place someone came to whisper things when they thought no one, mortal or divine, was listening. You close your eyes, and a voice rises, not out loud, not exactly. It's just there. A girl's voice, tired, gentle, careful, and, of course, her name is Nyctimene. Let's rewind a little. Because mythology has no real beginning, just points where the story tightens. Nyctimene was a princess of Lesbos, supposedly. Her name means night moon or night-minded, depending on which scholar you ask over coffee. And her life was a quiet one until it very suddenly wasn't. Historians still argue whether Nyctimene was a real figure absorbed into myth, or a myth layered with just enough humanity to feel real. But in most versions of the story, she doesn't do anything particularly shocking to earn the gods' attention. No hubris, no blasphemy, no declarations of being more beautiful than a deity. She doesn't even look at a forbidden tapestry. She simply prays. And not loudly, either. Just nightly, softly, alone. Perhaps she prayed for forgiveness. Perhaps she prayed to vanish. One version of the myth says her father, King Epopeus, committed a grievous, unmentionable act, and Nyctimene fled into the woods out of shame, guilt, and fear. Other scholars reject that interpretation, saying it's a Roman-era addition layered onto earlier, vaguer folklore. Still, the shadow remains. Whatever happened, Nyctimene stopped appearing in the daylight. She avoided people. She spoke only to the trees. You sit with that a while. A girl, praying to be unseen. That hits differently in a world where gods watch everything, where privacy is rare, and transformation is the fastest route to peace and obscurity. You trace a line on the stone. It's warm from sunlight that left hours ago, like the rock is still remembering daylight, even though you've both agreed to forget it for now. Nyctimene's prayers must have reached someone. And if the feathers are any indication, it was Athena. Now, Athena isn't known for empathy in the warm and fuzzy sense. She's logic, strategy, justice, but only the kind that fits into tidy moral boxes. She's the deity who rewards your intellect, your cunning, your composure. She doesn't usually get involved in emotional messes unless there's a city-state at stake or a really good lecture opportunity. So what caught her attention this time? Maybe it was the sheer persistence. Night after night, a voice in the woods, whispering not for glory or power, but to disappear. Maybe that was interesting, or maybe it was inconvenient. Gods don't like stories they didn't authorize, so perhaps Athena came down just to shut it off, or maybe, deep in her battle-ready mind, she felt something stir, a resemblance, a flicker, a loneliness she usually outmaneuvered. There's one strange fragment from an obscure 2nd century writer who claimed that Athena's owl, her sacred bird, was not originally hers, but adopted from a mortal girl whose eyes saw clearly in shame. That's it. No name, no citation, just that phrase, saw clearly in shame. Historians still argue whether it's a metaphor, a misprint, or an echo of Nyctimene's myth that somehow fluttered past the official records. But tonight, under this gentle sky, you let yourself believe that Athena came down to the woods, found the girl, and, without ceremony, granted her wish. Very well, the goddess might have said. If you insist on vanishing, let's make it useful. The transformation, as always, wasn't clean. The myths never describe a painless, flick of the wand moment. It's always writhing, shimmering, a fusion of regret and feathers. You imagine Nyctimene's arms stretching, her eyes widening, her voice twisting into a call that echoes between trees. Did she scream? Or was it a sigh of relief? Whatever it was, she became an owl, a small, dark creature with wide, blinking eyes and a sharp silence that held every word she'd never get to speak again. And just like that, she was gone. From society, from the temple rolls, from gossip, but not from memory, because the goddess took the form and made it a symbol. The owl perched on shields, coins, and pediments. It became a sign of wisdom, though no one ever asked the original girl if that was what she wanted. You shift where you're sitting. The stone beneath you hums with silence. You wonder, was it mercy? Was it punishment? Was it PR? Because Athena had a knack for rewriting stories to serve her image. A girl with secrets becomes a creature of mystery. A girl who asked to disappear becomes the mascot of a goddess who never needed to hide. That's the peculiar tension of Greek myths. They offer transformation as escape, but escape always comes with a brand. And yet, the owl still flies. Somewhere, a feather drifts past your cheek, impossibly slow. You don't reach for it. It lands near your sandal and stays there, soft and unbothered. Maybe she left it for you. Maybe she didn't. But it's here now, just like you are. You rise slowly from the stone, stretching your legs and brushing dust from your palms. That feather stays where it landed, as if the night doesn't want to let go of it yet. The owl, your silent guide, is gone, either hidden in the canopy or watching you from a better angle. You're not worried. In mythic spaces like this, you're never really alone, just observed. You step back into the narrow path threading between olive trees, and soon you come upon something strange nestled in the roots, a clay figurine of an owl, no bigger than your fist. Its features are stylized, round eyes, stubby wings, a little too symmetrical to be lifelike. It was likely left here long ago, an offering to Athena, or to the girl who became her owl, or perhaps to both. It's funny. People always assume myths have clear categories: gods above, mortals below, monsters somewhere inconveniently in the middle. But the truth is more layered. Mortals slip into God's stories all the time, leaving behind traces like this: statues, charms, the occasional oddly specific curse tablet. Athena, in particular, collected human stories like a cautious librarian, tidying some, shelving others, and rebranding the ones that didn't quite fit. Which brings us to something the myths don't usually say outright. Athena didn't invent owls, she adopted them. That's your historical fact for this stretch of the walk. In pre-classical Greece and Mesopotamia, owls were already associated with night, mystery, and female power. Some early texts link them to death, others to healing. The Athenians, ever efficient, folded those meanings into their image of wisdom. An owl that sees in the dark, knows what others miss, stays silent while the rest of the world flaps around squawking. But here's the quirky twist. Not everyone found owls charming. In fact, in some regions of Greece, owls were considered spooky little creeps. Farmers blamed them for bad harvests. Children were told not to look them in the eyes. There's even a surviving papyrus in which a traveling merchant describes hearing an owl hoot and immediately canceling his entire journey. Bad omen, he writes, from that cursed shadow bird, which, to be fair, would make a great band name. Historians still argue whether the owl's positive association with Athena helped rehabilitate the bird's reputation, or whether she simply saw potential in an already misunderstood animal. Either way, the bird stuck. You can still find it on ancient coins, like the silver tetradrachm, where Athena's helmeted head appears on one side, and a stubby, slightly surprised-looking owl stands beside an olive branch on the other. It's basically a mythological business card. You pause at a bend in the path and look up. A coin-shaped moon is caught in the branches above, peeking through the leaves like it's playing its own game of hide-and-seek. For a second, the owl's silhouette crosses it, just a blur of wings, and then it's gone again. You wonder, did Nyctimene ever get used to flying? Did she embrace the freedom? Or did she mourn her hands, her voice, her ability to walk upright through a city square without drawing frightened looks? There's no definite answer. And the myths don't care much for follow-up stories. But fragments do survive. Stories told in fragments of pottery, in local rituals, in odd little festivals that no longer make sense to anyone. On the island of Lesbos, for instance, archaeologists once found a rural shrine with dozens of clay owls buried in the ground. No inscriptions, no central statue. Just layers upon layers of offerings. Historians still argue whether the shrine was to Athena or perhaps to a local spirit who shared her symbols. But some dreamier academics suggest something more poetic, that the shrine was for Nyctimene herself. A space where those who felt shame, grief, or exile could offer a feather, a whisper, a prayer to the girl who asked to be unseen and was made permanent for it. Not as a punishment, not exactly as a gift, but as a middle state, neither lost nor truly remembered. You continue along the path, and the grove begins to thin. Moonlight spreads a little more boldly, revealing rocks and shrubs and the remains of a boundary wall, once meant to keep sacred space apart from the mundane world. As you cross it, You half expect a chorus of invisible priests to mutter rules at you, but no one objects. Not even the owl. Still, something shifts. The terrain changes subtly, stones underfoot, the angle of the slope. You're leaving Athena's olive grove and entering the woods where Nyctimene fled long ago. These trees are older, taller, less tidy. Pine, cypress, and something dark with needles that catch in your sleeves. It's quieter here, but heavier, too. This is where the transformation happened. Not in a temple, not in front of an altar, but here, in the hush of trees that don't judge, where a girl could beg to vanish and, astonishingly, be heard. And it raises an uncomfortable question. When did becoming something else become the only way to be safe? Greek myths are filled with transformations, especially of women, into trees, birds, streams, constellations. Some scholars call it escape. Others call it erasure. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect ancient trauma, or whether they were simply moral metaphors that grew wings and flew out of control. But you're standing in the woods now, and it doesn't feel metaphorical. It feels leafy and damp and real. And the girl at the center of this story doesn't feel like a symbol. She feels like someone who made a choice under duress and was offered a strange kind of mercy in return. The owl returns, this time closer, just above your head. It lands on a low branch, watching. It doesn't blink. You're not sure it's Nyctimene, of course. That would be too easy. But you are sure of this. In these woods, stories echo differently. They're quieter, sadder, and often wiser than their loudest versions. And in that silence, you hear something else. A faint hum, like wings, but slower. A resonance of memory, not yours, not the owl's, but hers. And the moment you hear it, you know the story's not done. You stand still beneath the low branch, feeling the owl's gaze like a soft weight on your shoulder. It doesn't move, just watches. Its eyes, round, dark, too deep to be glass, don't blink. And in this suspended moment, you realize she's not waiting to tell you something. She's waiting for you to understand something you've already been told. You take a few slow steps deeper into the darker woods. The air here is cooler, laced with pine and damp soil, and it feels less like a forest and more like a memory you've stepped into by accident or invitation. The trees are spaced like columns. The wind hushes like drapery. It's quiet, not the kind of quiet that waits for sound, but the kind that is sound. You walk softer. This is where the myths always get blurry. You know how it is. Names change. Motives shift. The original story gets copied and recopied until someone decides a few flourishes wouldn't hurt. The story of Nyctimene is no different. Some ancient writers give you only a sentence. And she, in shame, hid herself from men, and the goddess turned her into a bird that flies by night. That's it. No details. No motive. No drama. Just a passing line. like she was an afterthought scribbled in the margins of a much more important god's to-do list. Others tried to fill in the gaps. The Roman writer Hyginus, for example, names her father as Epopeus and implies a terrible crime, something forbidden, something unspeakable. But even Hyginus sounds like he's repeating gossip heard secondhand at a divine symposium. Historians still argue whether this grim detail was part of the original myth or a later attempt to add moral weight, as Roman authors love to do. Because what's a transformation without a little guilt? It makes the audience feel like they're learning something important, even if they're just watching a girl get turned into wildlife. You pause at a tree trunk thick with moss, one side of it hollow just enough to imagine someone once slept inside it, or hid there. You reach out and run your hand across the bark. It feels like velvet in some places, and sandpaper in others, layers of time pressed close. Here's the part that slips through the cracks. Before she was an owl, Nyctimene was a girl, a person. And like most girls in myths, her agency was minimal. Her choices limited, but the one thing that always seems consistent, no matter the version. She chose to disappear, not to die, not to fight, not even to be avenged, just to vanish. You can almost hear her footsteps echoing alongside yours in the undergrowth. Bare feet, perhaps sandals made of bark. And every night, perhaps, she returned to the same patch of woods, to the same tree, whispering a prayer not of vengeance, but of forgetfulness. And that's where Athena comes back in. Because here's what we forget about the gods. They're not fair. They're not just. They're not kind. But they are interested, especially in stories that don't fit the usual arc. A girl who asks not for power, or beauty, or revenge, but for silence? That's a novelty. So maybe Athena didn't come out of pity. Maybe she came out of curiosity, or even admiration. And when she saw Nyctimene, frail, exhausted, eyes rimmed red but clear, maybe she said something like, "Very well, let's make this permanent." Or maybe she didn't say anything at all. Maybe she just looked. And then the change happened. Some say it was instant. Others say it took hours. That feathers replaced skin slowly, that her arms shrank and folded, that her voice cracked and warped until it was no longer human, but still held a kind of shape. Here's your quirky detail of the night. In certain regional myths, shape-shifting wasn't always a one-time deal. Some believed it happened in stages, like molting, days of in-between, where the girl wandered with wings too small to fly and hands too twisted to hold anything. An awkward liminality that no bard wanted to sing about. You imagine Nyctimene during that time, half girl, half owl, hiding from both gods and mortals, tripping over roots and over her own changing form. The kind of story that doesn't fit on a vase. Too messy, too real. But eventually, the change completed. She became what she'd asked to be, small, silent, able to move through the night unseen. Her wings cut clean lines through air. Her new eyes saw the world in grays and silvers. And her name, though no longer spoken by mortals, curled into the shape of a bird's call and was carried on the wind. And yet, the story didn't end, because Athena didn't just let her go. No, she kept the owl. Not literally, perhaps not the same body, the same creature, but the idea, the image, the emblem. Athena's owl became a symbol of wisdom, clarity, strategy. It appeared on helmets, coins, shields. It adorned scrolls and library walls. But nobody remembered where it came from. Or rather, nobody cared. Historians still argue whether the owl was chosen because of Nyctimene, or whether the myths simply merged for convenience. Either way, the girl who vanished became a brand. You find a tree stump and sit, watching the owl above you. It has not moved, and you begin to feel it. Not a story with a lesson, but a shape. The shape of silence, of watching, of being remembered wrongly, or not at all. And somewhere in that stillness, you hear something unexpected. A soft, single hoot, not dramatic, not eerie, just a sound to say, I'm still here. You close your eyes, and the woods lean in to listen. When you open your eyes again, the owl is gone. Not with a flap, not with a rush, just gone. As if it blinked out of one part of the world and into another. The branch it perched on sways gently. A little movement that could be the wind, or something older than wind. Either way, the message is clear. You're meant to keep going. You follow the slope downward, stepping around thick roots and stones slick with moss. The ground here is soft, mulch and fallen leaves and that earthy, damp smell that suggests the forest is busy remembering everything. Your feet crunch lightly, and even that sound feels like an interruption. But the deeper you go, the more you start to notice something strange. Other birds, not real ones, carvings. Etched into trees, scratched into rock faces, pecked into the dirt, owls everywhere. Some realistic, with round eyes and detailed feathers, others more abstract, just circles with dots for eyes, like ancient emojis. Some are paired with olive branches, others are solitary, wide-eyed and floating. You've stumbled into something older than graffiti and less formal than temple art. A memory space, a whisper gallery. A visual retelling by people who didn't have the power or permission to write her name. This was Nyctimene's forest. You let your fingers trail across one of the carvings. The bark is worn smooth, the lines shallow from years of rain. But the image persists. Someone kept it alive. That's your historical detail for this part of the journey. Throughout Greece and its islands, especially in rural areas, people often carved figures of gods or animals into trees and stones, not as official votive offerings, but as personal markers. Not everyone had access to temples. Not every prayer came with a coin. And in these lonely places, groves, hillsides, riverbanks, people told their stories in scratches and symbols. A girl becomes a bird, so you carve the bird to remember the girl. Or maybe to join her. Here's the quirky bit. One 5th century inscription found near Lesbos contains an odd little message. A scratched line in rough Aeolic dialect that reads, roughly translated, "She sees more than we do." That's it. No signature. Just that. It could mean anything. A goddess, a ghost, an owl. Historians still argue whether that fragment refers to Athena or to someone else entirely. But you know better now. You know whose eyes they meant. You sit for a while on a mossy rock and let yourself imagine what the forest might have felt like to Nyctimene. Not as an escape, but as a threshold. A limbo. Not quite girl, not quite bird. Waiting for the rest of her story to catch up, you picture her crouched under a tree, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide in the dark. At first, terrified of every branch creak. Then slowly becoming part of the sounds, hearing the fox pad by, the deer step lightly, the nightjar call. And then hearing herself, her own breathing, softer now, her own voice fading, until all that's left is wings. And then the transformation truly begins. You think about all the things the myth didn't bother to describe, what she ate, where she slept, whether she missed the weight of her hair or the shape of her own name. And you wonder, did Athena ever check back in? Was it a one-time divine intervention? Or did the goddess return now and then, gliding through the trees as an idea more than a figure, watching her former mortal adapt? The myths don't say, but you imagine a scene anyway. A soft night, the stars like silver seeds. Nyctimene, now owl-shaped, but not yet wise, perched on a branch, staring into the dark. And Athena, standing below, arms crossed, unreadable as ever. Still not talking, the goddess might say, and the owl might blink. And Athena, maybe, would smile just a little and say, "Good." Because what do you do with a story that isn't useful? You let it be quiet. You let it live on the edges. You let it drift like feathers in a grove no one marks on their maps anymore. You stand and continue walking. The forest opens slightly ahead, and you come to a shallow pool reflecting the moon. Owls don't care for water, usually. But this pool seems important. Someone once ringed it with stones. There are faint scorch marks at the edges, old fires, ritual or warmth. Who knows? A few scraps of broken pottery lie half buried. You crouch and fish one out. It's curved and painted, just a fragment, but you make out a single black eye, maybe the side of a vase, maybe a dish once offered to the goddess, or maybe, just maybe, a depiction of the girl who used to be seen. You imagine someone standing here, centuries ago, alone in the night, holding this dish in trembling hands, whispering a name they weren't supposed to know. Nyctimene, and dropping the offering into the water, not with a splash, but a plunk, a small goodbye, a soft thank you. The water ripples. Your reflection shivers and reforms. Behind you, a shadow moves, a wing, maybe. You don't turn. you just smile, because you're starting to understand the rhythm of this place. This isn't a story of tragedy. Not exactly. It's a story of someone who left one world without asking permission and became something that sees everything, even if no one sees her. And the trees, they remember. You rise and start walking again, quieter now. The owl doesn't return, not yet, but you can feel its presence hovering, always one branch ahead, one breath behind, not watching you, accompanying you. And the woods begin to feel less like exile and more like sanctuary. You walk slowly now, careful not to break the stillness that has settled around you like a woolen blanket. The ground rises again, gentle and steady, leading you away from the pool and deeper into the forest's folds. The scent changes, less pine, more wild thyme, the kind that grows in dry patches between stones. It smells old, familiar, like something from a story your grandmother never got around to telling. And there, at the top of the slope, is a clearing not marked on any map. A ring of standing stones encircles a flat patch of earth, just large enough for a ritual or a memory. You step into it, half expecting to feel a jolt of mythic static, but instead, it's just calm, like the breath between heartbeats, a pause too full to be empty. You're not alone here, not exactly. In the stones, more carvings, owls again. In various stages of abstraction, some look regal. Others look faintly ridiculous, as if someone tried to draw one from memory and got distracted halfway through. You grin. Maybe that one was a tribute. Maybe it was a joke. Or maybe Nyctimene herself laughed sometimes. The myths rarely mention laughter, especially not from women. And you move from stone to stone, reading with your fingers, piecing together fragments of images and stories, none of them complete, but all of them pointing back to one thing. This girl mattered. Not to the world, maybe. Not to poets or kings, but to someone enough to carve, enough to remember. And that's your historical fact for the moment. Many ancient cults operated quietly, outside the official Olympian pantheon. Small groups would worship local figures, heroes, nymphs, spirits, who never made it into the big festivals. These were private rituals, often female-led, passed down orally, practiced in the margins. Nyctimene may never have had temples built in her name. But someone kept her story alive in trees, in stones, in whispered retellings. And this circle feels like one of those places. A liminal site where the divine brushed the ordinary and didn't quite wipe its feet. The quirky detail? In one obscure inscription from a hillside near Mythology, scholars found what appears to be a recipe for owl-shaped cakes. Honey and barley, shaped into round little birds, offered at midsummer with no explanation. The text reads only, "For the night seer." That's it. No goddess name, no context. Historians still argue whether the offering was meant for Athena or for some forgotten chthonic spirit. But the timing lines up oddly well with one old version of Nyctimene's story, that she was transformed during the summer solstice, the longest day, right before she chose to vanish into the longest night. You kneel in the center of the clearing. The grass is thin, but soft. You touch the ground. It's warm, as if holding heat from a sun long gone. You whisper her name, not loudly, not reverently, but the way you'd say a friend's name if you weren't sure she was still in the room. Nyctimene. There's no thunder, no divine voice from above, just a small wind that loops around the stones and disappears into the trees. And yet, you feel something change, a shift in weight, in air, in you. You realize something. This isn't just a story about a girl turned into an owl. It's about what happens when someone is erased and then half remembered, and then, miraculously, remembered again, even imperfectly, even with gaps, even through carvings that make her look more like a surprised teacup than a bird. Because memory doesn't need precision, it needs persistence. And in that persistence, there's power. You stay kneeling a moment longer, then rise and begin to walk again. The forest presses close around you, but it feels less like confinement now and more like a chorus, like the trees are humming softly, approving your passage. The owl reappears on a branch ahead. You pause. This time, you see her clearly. Her feathers are not grand. They're plain, dusk-colored, perfectly forgettable. But her eyes, those are something else. Deep, patient, shimmering with something between resignation and peace. She looks at you, not through you, not past you, at you. And in that gaze is no rage, no demand, just the quiet satisfaction of being seen, even briefly. You nod. She blinks. And then, with a stretch of wings that barely rustles the air, she lifts off the branch and glides ahead. Not away, just forward, a little farther down the path. She is not fleeing, she is leading. The owl leads you deeper, not fast, not far, just enough. She glides like a thought you've almost forgotten, the kind that slips in during quiet moments and makes you pause halfway through brushing your teeth. The woods have changed again. The trees are older here, wider. Their roots braid across the ground in elaborate knots, as though the forest itself has been tying and untying stories beneath your feet for centuries. And for a moment, it's easy to imagine that you're not walking forward, but backward, into older myths, deeper ones, where names barely stuck and meanings were as changeable as moonlight on leaves. There's a clearing ahead, smaller this time, hemmed by low shrubs and overhanging branches. In the center, a broken column lies on its side, half swallowed by vines. Not part of a grand temple, too humble for that. Maybe an outpost, maybe a waymarker. Or maybe just a stone someone once stood on to speak, and then forgot to come back. You sit beside it and run your hand along the surface. The column is pitted, rough in places, but here and there, the lines of engraving remain. You can just make out 2 Greek letters, Nu and Upsilon, fragments, maybe, of a name. Nyctimene, or maybe not. but you decide to believe it anyway. This is a story about choosing what to remember. As you sit there, breathing in the silence, something else settles into place. The realization that Nyctimene wasn't just turned into an owl. She was turned into the owl, the definitive article, the icon, the one that would sit beside Athena for the next several thousand years, wide-eyed and unreadable. And here's your historical fact. By the 5th century BCE, the owl had become so tightly linked with Athens that its image appeared on nearly all Athenian tetradrachms, the most widely circulated silver coin in the Greek world. Merchants across the Mediterranean recognized it instantly. Athena on one side, owl on the other, flanked by an olive branch and the letters Athene. Even in distant ports, the owl meant commerce, order, a city that valued intellect. But did anyone remember the girl? Here's the quirky detail. In a private collection cataloged in the 19th century, there's a curious coin, not officially minted, but seemingly crafted as a novelty or charm. On one side, the owl, just as expected. On the other, a woman's face, partially obscured, with exaggerated eyes and a faint feathered edge to her hair. Around the edge, no legend. Just one word scratched awkwardly in script. Nyctimene. Nyctimene. No one knows who made it, or why. It's never been officially recognized by any archaeological authority, but you like to imagine it was made by someone who remembered, or someone who wanted to remember. Historians still argue whether this coin was a forgery, a devotional token, or a misunderstood artifact. But again, you know better. You know the difference between forgery and faith. The owl circles once overhead, then lands nearby. Perching on the column's broken top, she tilts her head at you. You tilt your head back. It feels polite. She hoots, just once, soft and almost amused, and blinks slowly, like she's giving you time to catch up. And you realize that for all Athena's wisdom, her greatest magic might have been her ability to steal stories. Not maliciously, not even consciously, but thoroughly. Take a girl with no name, no temple, no army. Give her a fate she didn't ask for. Make her transformation symbolic. Then let the symbol outlive her until no one questions where it came from. Athena becomes the goddess of wisdom. The owl becomes her sacred animal. And the girl? She becomes the space between those two facts. A myth within a myth. A ghost inside the emblem. But here, in this grove, you get to unseal the layers. You get to remember not just the owl, but the girl who didn't want to be seen, who begged not to be known, and who was then eternally known in the most indirect way possible. You lie back in the moss and watch the moon rise higher, round and clean and full of secrets. And you think about how many myths hinge on transformation. Daphne into a laurel, Callisto into a bear, Philomela into a nightingale, and now Nyctimene into an owl. Historians still debate whether these transformations were meant to comfort, to warn, or simply to explain why certain birds won't shut up at night. But in each story, the girl leaves behind her name and gains feathers or fur. In each, silence becomes survival. You close your eyes and let the quiet deepen. There are no footsteps here, no prayers, just the breathing of the forest and the occasional shuffle of feathers. And you realize you haven't heard a single human voice in some time. Not because the story has grown cold, but because the story itself has settled. Like dust, like memory, like a girl who asked to be forgotten and ended up being remembered in every coin that ever passed through an Athenian's hand. Not bad for a myth that barely gets more than a paragraph in the official books. You open your eyes. The owl is gone again. You don't look for her this time. You just smile and stand, brushing the moss from your clothes, and step off the stone. The path ahead isn't marked, but you know which way to go. You always have. The forest begins to thin again, gently, like it's loosening its grip on you. The dense canopy above starts to open into ragged gaps where stars peek through, blinking patiently. The wind shifts, not colder, just wider. You're leaving the inner circle, the myth's warm belly, and stepping out toward the open edges where stories fray. And yet, the owl stays near. You hear her wings now and then, that soft feather drag of air rearranged. She doesn't lead anymore. She accompanies. Like a shadow that chose to stay, or a memory that likes to hover just outside your line of sight. Ahead, you spot another clearing, but this one feels different. Built, and there's a crumbled wall on one side and 3 marble steps half sunk in the dirt, leading up to what was probably once a small altar. This wasn't grand, maybe a roadside shrine, a private offering place for someone who didn't have the means or the patience for temple bureaucracy. And there, nestled into the stones, you find something that makes you pause. A pile of old clay votives, broken and softened by time. Many are unrecognizable, but one still holds its shape. A crude owl, head tilted, wings too short for realism. Someone made it by hand. Someone left it here. You kneel and examine the base. Faint scratch marks form a circle around the bottom, and within it, the same word again, Nyctimene, that almost name. You let your fingers rest there a moment, feeling the ridges. This wasn't an official ritual. This was personal, intimate. Someone knew the story beneath the symbol, or maybe they didn't know the full story, but they felt it. And that was enough. Here's your historical fact for tonight's path. In ancient Greece, domestic shrines were common. Many homes had tiny altars for household gods, for local spirits, for figures that weren't in the official Olympic club, but still mattered. People left offerings there, oil, bread, honey, even small clay figures, especially to female deities and spirits associated with childbirth, the hearth, or protection from unseen harm. And it's not hard to imagine someone, centuries ago, whispering Nyctimene's name into a darkened kitchen corner or beside a child's bed, asking for unseen protection from a girl who once fled into the night and came back with sharper eyes. Now here's your quirky detail. One surviving household spell from Hellenistic Rhodes invokes the Lady of Wings, who watches in stillness. No other name. No myth attached, but the language is peculiar. It doesn't match the phrasing used for Iris, the messenger goddess, or Nike, victory. Some scholars have speculated it's a local, owl-based spirit. Others dismiss it as poetic nonsense. But tonight, in this clearing, you start to suspect it was her, because not every spirit is loud. Some stories operate like background music, shaping mood, setting tone, rarely asking for credit. And Nyctimene? She was the original unsung transformation. The patron saint of not being seen, but still being there. You sit on the edge of the altar, taking in the space. The stones are cold, but not unkind. You imagine the votives glowing in torchlight, the whispered prayers, the moments of quiet between worries. Someone saying, "Watch over me," and the night silently agreeing. You breathe out slowly, and the air responds, not in words, just in presence. And then, for the first time, the owl speaks, not in Greek, not in thunder, just a sound, low, rhythmic, a repeated call that doesn't ask, doesn't demand, just exists. Like a heartbeat with wings, you look up, and there she is, perched on the highest point of the broken wall, silhouetted against the moon. She hoots again, softer this time, then tilts her head, and you feel the weight of her eyes. She is not Athena's now. Not entirely. She is her own. Which brings us to a scholarly debate that still splits academic conference panels like a lightning bolt across a clear sky. Did Athena steal the owl as a symbol? Or did the owl choose her? Some argue that the bird, like many symbols, was absorbed by the city-state machine, repurposed, polished, and stamped onto coins for easy circulation. Others say Athena needed the owl, that her identity as a goddess of wisdom didn't fully take shape until the bird arrived to define it. But there's a third camp, small, eccentric, mostly ignored, that insists the owl was the wisdom, that whatever mortal became it, whatever story transformed into feather and eye, she was the one who taught Athena to see in the dark. You like that theory? Because tonight, you followed feathers through a forest, past forgotten shrines and stones that whisper. And what you've learned doesn't come from marble or epic poems. It comes from quiet, from watching, from patience. Wisdom isn't loud. It blinks slowly, waits for the world to settle, and then speaks once, softly, and with meaning. You rise from the altar, leaving the votive undisturbed. You nod to the owl. She watches you go. And as you step back into the woods, you realize this is not a tragedy. This is not even a warning. It's a memory. And memory, when tended properly, can take flight. The forest behind you exhales gently as you leave the clearing. The kind of long, breathy sigh you make when a story finally settles into the right shape. The owl does not follow this time. She remains behind, perched on that broken altar stone, as if to say, "You've seen enough. The rest is mine," and that feels fair. The path ahead becomes thinner, rougher. Roots crisscross like tangled thoughts, and you step carefully, each footfall mindful. There's a rhythm to it now. This walking, this remembering, as if the woods are a scroll unrolling under your feet, and each step reveals one more line of forgotten poetry. You're beginning to understand that Nyctimene's story was never meant for volume. It was never chanted in choruses or carved in triumphal friezes. It wasn't tragic enough for the tragedians or useful enough for the philosophers. And yet, it remained. Somewhere between the olive trees and the moonlit pools, it persisted. Because some stories survive not through scale, but through stubbornness, through the quiet people who remember anyway. You reach a rise in the land and stop to catch your breath, not from exhaustion, but from something else. A feeling, subtle but solid, that you've crossed a threshold. Below, in the shallow valley, you see it. The remains of a once active shrine, now collapsed into wild flowers and brambles. Just a few stones remain upright, columns without a roof, a fragment of a carved pediment, and a cracked basin half filled with rainwater. But the layout is unmistakable. A rectangular floor plan, aligned to the moonrise. This was a place of worship, but not for Athena. You descend slowly, letting the scene come into focus. The architecture is simpler than Athenian marble. More island style, rough-cut limestone, softer edges. The kind of craftsmanship meant for function over spectacle. And scattered throughout the site, mostly hidden beneath flowering vines and clumps of moss, are more owls. Not statues this time, just small fragments. Clay tokens, charcoal drawings, scratched silhouettes on stone. They don't match. They aren't uniform, but together, they tell a clear story. This was a sanctuary for Nyctimene. Here's your historical fact. In the Greek world, there existed what scholars call minor cults, localized. Often semi-private religious practices centered around lesser-known figures, some of whom never appeared in major myth cycles. These cults were community-based, with little formal doctrine, and often sprang up around figures who embodied liminality. Crossroads, twilight, grief, recovery. And here's your quirky detail. On the island of Lesbos, there's a ruined site near the town of Athens where archaeologists found multiple owl figurines, always paired with crescent moon motifs in strangely woven nets. No inscriptions, no dedications to Athena. Just symbols of night and entrapment. Some scholars link it to Nyctimene. Others shrug and call it domestic owl iconography, which is the academic equivalent of saying, we don't really know, but it sure is owl-shaped. You wander the ruins now, brushing petals aside, tracing worn grooves in stone. The place is crumbling. Yes, but not abandoned. The air hums here, like it's tuned to a different frequency, like it's ready. You pause beside the basin. The rainwater inside is perfectly still, reflecting your face, the stars, and a half-visible moon. And then, something else. A feather drifts down, not from the sky, but from somewhere closer. It spins once, twice, then lands on the surface, sending out tiny ripples. And for just a moment, the image in the water shifts. You see eyes, enormous, unblinking, not menacing, just aware. You don't speak. There's no need. The shrine has already listened to hundreds of voices before yours. It knows this ritual. You reach into your pocket where you forgot you tucked that tiny feather from earlier and drop it into the basin. It joins the floating one and drifts into a slow, shared spiral. The water settles again. The silence deepens. You feel not watched, but acknowledged. Which leads us to an uncomfortable question the myths never answered directly. Did Nyctimene want to be remembered? She asked to disappear. She fled the world of people, of court, of names. And yet, even in owl form, she became emblematic, her silhouette etched into coins, her image perched beside wisdom, her presence sewn into Athens' visual DNAs. Historians still argue whether that was a violation of her wish or a fulfillment of it. But here, in this moonlit ruin, you realize memory is not always invasive. Sometimes it's reverent. Sometimes it's not about dragging someone back into the spotlight, but leaving a candle lit in a forgotten room, just in case they ever want to return. You walk through the remains of the shrine one last time. Feels full, even in its brokenness, like a story that doesn't need to end, only to pause. You find a piece of slate and scratch something simple into it. Just a small circle with 2 dots for eyes. Not a name, not a declaration, just a presence. Then you place the slate on a flat stone and turn away. The owl is waiting again, this time on a low branch at the edge of the grove. She blinks, you nod, and together, without a word, you begin walking once more. You walk without hurry now, not because you're tired, but because speed feels rude here. Every step is a whisper. Every turn in the path feels like a soft breath through an ancient doorway. The owl flies ahead occasionally, gliding low and close, then looping back to perch just beyond arm's reach, always near, never interrupting. The forest starts to change around you again. Not abruptly, just a subtle shift in the trees, the way their trunks lean, the way the moonlight hits their bark. You're moving into older terrain, not in years, but in feeling. As if even the myths get quieter here. You find yourself entering a glade ringed with stones, not for worship this time, but for stories. It's an open-air amphitheater of sorts, just grass and moss and low stone seats, uneven with age, no altar, no columns, just space. And that's when you realize this was a place for retelling. Imagine it centuries ago, on a soft evening like this. A fire crackling in the center. A few people huddled around, sharing bread, figs, and fragments of story, not reciting the great tragedies. not invoking the Olympians, just telling the smaller, quieter myths. Like Nyctimene's, you sit on one of the stones, still warm from moonlight, and listen, not to a voice, but to the silence between wind shifts. That silence has weight here, not heavy, but meaningful, like it's holding something for you. And here's your historical fact. The Greeks had formal festivals for their gods, structured, elaborate, full of processions and prizes. But they also had informal gatherings called symposia, where people lounged and talked, told tales, asked questions, and sometimes played a game of what if with their myths. These settings allowed for creative reworkings, alternate endings, character swaps, moral debates. It's in those moments. Many scholars believe that smaller myths evolved. Side characters got backstories. Minor deities got promotion offers. And nameless girls who became owls were given just a little more time in the firelight. And your quirky detail? One surviving record from a 4th century symposium on the island of Kos mentions the Owl Maiden of Lesbos as part of a longer discussion on divine justice. A guest at the dinner reportedly asked, "If wisdom belongs to the gods, must it be stolen from mortals first?" The host changed the subject. The question remains. You lie back in the grass, letting the past swirl around you. And you realize something you hadn't quite put together until now. Nyctimene didn't disappear. She adapted. She didn't become less. She became something that could survive outside of the spotlight. Because here's the thing about transformation in myth. It's rarely about loss. It's about shift, movement, an act of becoming something other, not something lesser. Daphne didn't die. She became a tree. Callisto didn't perish. She became a constellation. And Nyctimene didn't vanish. She took flight. Historians still debate whether these stories were meant to soothe or to terrify, to empower or to silence. But sitting here, in this quiet bowl of story and starlight, you feel like maybe they were meant to explain why things linger, why the night carries whispers, why certain birds always seem to be watching. And the owl is watching now, from a branch above you, still and small and impossibly present. Her feathers are soft grays and dusky browns, streaked with moonlight. She doesn't blink. She doesn't need to. You meet her gaze and feel no fear. Just connection. And in that moment, you ask yourself, if the world tried to forget her, why did so many people remember, even imperfectly? Why the coins, the statues, the scribbled names, the fragments in symposium records? Because people felt something in her story, not the facts, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The shape of a girl who couldn't stay as she was, who had to become something else to survive, who vanished just enough to find peace, but not so much that we forgot her entirely. You stand slowly and give the amphitheater a last look. No applause, no epilogue, just the hush of old stories still echoing. Then you follow the owl once more, down a path that curves inward like a spiral. Each step forward feels like walking deeper into a memory, not your own, but one you've agreed to carry. trees lean in. The sky darkens just a little more. You don't need light now. You have direction, not forward, not backward, just through. The spiral path curves tighter, like it's winding you toward the center of something, an idea, a memory, or maybe just the soft beating heart of the story itself. The trees grow taller here, though more spaced apart, like guardians keeping respectful distance. The moon has risen higher, its light more silver than white now, painting everything in quiet tones that make even the roughest stones look soft. You move without needing to think, and the ground feels like it knows you, not just your footsteps, but your intentions. The owl is nowhere in sight now, but she's not gone. She's just giving you space. That's the thing about owls. They're not followers. They're not pets. They're watchers, listeners. And tonight, you realize that you become one too. This whole journey has been less about discovering Nyctimene and more about practicing her silence, her patience, her refusal to demand anything but presence. And now, you arrive at the center, a circular space ringed by old standing stones, taller this time, worn almost smooth by weather and time. In the center, a tree, not olive, not pine, but something in between, with pale bark and branches like reaching fingers. Its leaves barely move, even though you can feel the wind on your skin. And carved into the trunk, at eye level, is a single word: Nyctimene. Nyctimene, not scratched in haste, not defaced, just there, quiet, deliberate. Someone remembered. Someone came all the way here and said, "This is the name," and that someone made sure it stayed. You reach out and place your hand on the carving. The bark is cool, smooth in the grooves, rough around the edges. It almost pulses under your touch, not alive in the usual sense, but awake. And just for a moment, it feels like the tree is breathing with you. This is your historical fact. Sacred trees were often marked with names, not always of gods, but of figures the locals revered. Unlike statues, which could be toppled or moved, trees anchored memory. They couldn't be stolen. They grew with the myth. And here's the quirky detail. In a set of Hellenistic rural rituals, recorded on parchment now lost, but quoted in a Roman agricultural manual, there's mention of the night watch tree, where maidens once hung feathers to quiet the moon. No explanation is given, no god is named. But in some of those communities, girls would press their palms to a tree and whisper to it, not asking for anything, just letting it hear them. You stay like that, hand to bark, until the breeze shifts and brings with it the scent of something faintly sweet. Not flowers, something older, like aged honey and burnt herbs. It's the smell of offerings made long ago, a ritual that still clings to the roots. You pull back your hand and sit at the base of the tree, your back against its trunk. The stones around you don't feel ominous. They feel curated, placed. Each one angled just slightly inward. as if watching over the center, watching over her. And now you think back, across everything you've seen so far. The feathers, the shrine, the broken votives, the owl in the trees, the silence in the amphitheater, the unanswered questions in symposium notes. It all folds together. Nyctimene was never meant to be a centerpiece. She was meant to hover at the edge of the myth, a soft blur, a question mark with wings. And yet, here she is, centered, rooted, carved into bark that still stands centuries later. Which makes you wonder, was the transformation really a punishment? Or was it an elevation? Historians still argue whether being turned into an animal was always meant to symbolize loss, but what if, just once, it was a way out? A gift? What if Nyctimene was the rare case where the gods listened and didn't twist the wish? What if Athena saw her and, instead of pitying her, said, "Here, have your peace and keep your sight"? Because the owl does see everything, and not just in the dark. In the light, too. In the cracks. In the silences between spoken words. You lean your head back against the tree and look up through its branches. The stars above are sharper now, as if you've risen closer to them without moving. The night hums gently. Wind in leaves. Some distant insect song. The occasional flap of a bird far overhead. And in this stillness, you begin to understand the cost of clarity. To see everything is not always to be wise. It can be lonely, quiet, but it can also be kind. To observe gently, to withhold judgment, to listen without interruption. You breathe out and close your eyes. And in the darkness behind your lids, you see her, not as a bird or a carving or a myth, but as a girl standing quietly beside you, eyes dark and luminous, saying nothing, not out of fear, but because silence is her language now, and you, at last, are fluent. You stay beneath the tree a little longer, not because there's more to see, but because the moment feels too balanced to disturb. The stones, the night air, the memory of Nyctimene, all of it settles into a gentle harmony, like the pause between verses in a lullaby. There's a stillness to it. Yes, but not emptiness. The kind of stillness that holds meaning. Eventually, you rise and begin walking again. The forest seems to shift with you, trees pulling back, moonlight widening its path, even the grass underfoot growing softer. You're not leaving her behind. You're carrying her forward. And soon, you arrive at something unexpected. A wall. Not a temple wall or the side of a shrine, but the remains of a dwelling. A home. Low stone foundations mark the layout. 2 rooms, maybe 3, with a collapsed hearth in the middle and a few scattered shards of ceramic pots. One has a faint owl stamped into the base, half worn from centuries of rain and root. You kneel beside the hearth, brushing aside a few leaves. There's a scatter of bones, chicken, perhaps charcoal, a cracked piece of painted pottery showing the edge of a woman's robe, domestic debris, long abandoned. And that's when it hits you. Someone lived here, beside her, not with her, perhaps, not knowing the full truth, but near enough to build a life in the shelter of her presence. Maybe a devotee, maybe a healer, maybe a family that never knew why the owls always lingered by the windows, but left a bowl of honey anyway. This is your historical fact. Owl iconography wasn't limited to temples and coins. In rural homes, especially on islands like Lesbos, it often showed up on hearth tiles, water jugs, and even hairpins. A subtle symbol, not always tied to Athena, but to something gentler, protective, watchful. Here's the quirky detail. A dig in western Lesbos unearthed a spindle whorl, a small, round weight used for spinning thread, with an owl etched into one side and the word Athena, I saw, on the other. It wasn't standard decoration. It was personal. One theory? The spinner was invoking the owl's clarity, asking to see what others miss. You sit in the broken outline of this old house and imagine the lives once spun here. A woman twisting flax by firelight, whispering to herself. A child watching shadows on the wall, hearing an owl call and thinking, she's close tonight. Maybe they didn't know her name. Maybe they did. But they felt her presence, her story, her quiet watching. And you begin to understand something new. Nyctimene wasn't forgotten because her story was obscure. She was remembered differently, deliberately, not loudly, but intimately, not in marble, but in murmurs. She became not a goddess, not a cautionary tale, but a presence. The spirit of the edge of things, the quiet corners, the liminal spaces, the places where you go not to be seen, but to be held. You rise and pass through the threshold of the old home. There's no door now, just a gap between stones. But as you step through it, the wind picks up, brushing your arms with a cool breath that feels like farewell, or maybe welcome. The owl is waiting again, perched on a low branch, eyes reflecting starlight like polished glass. She doesn't hoot, doesn't move, just watches. And for the first time, you feel no need to interpret her gaze. You simply receive it. Because what's left to say? You've walked her story. You've listened to her silence. You've traced the places she once moved through in body and still moves through in memory. And so, for the first time, you say it aloud. Not a shout, not a declaration, just a whisper. Nyctimene. The owl blinks. And then, very softly, she turns and lifts off, wings cutting through the dark with soundless grace. She doesn't vanish. She just moves on. And you follow. Not behind, not beneath, but alongside. The owl doesn't lead you now, not really. She glides ahead. Sure, but at a slower pace. Not as a guide, but as a companion. You're no longer chasing a myth through brambles and ruins. You're walking with it. The story is no longer just something you're uncovering. It's something you're carrying. The path curves again, looping through a grove of thin, pale trees with bark that glows slightly in the moonlight. Almost silver. They look like they were painted on, not planted. You walk between them slowly, reverently, like entering a gallery of quiet ghosts. And then, another change. A new scent in the air, sweet, floral, faintly herbal, lavender, perhaps, or something like it. You look down and see small tufts of blooming wildflowers clustered along the path. Someone must have planted them here long ago. Or maybe they just knew to grow where memory lingered. Ahead, you see the edge of a structure, no columns or altar this time. Just a low, carved stone bench facing a tall rock wall. The wall is blank except for one thing. A single owl etched deep into the stone. Not stylized, not decorative, just accurate, life-sized, detailed. The eyes are impossibly well carved, round, deep, and shaded to give the illusion of depth even in this pale light. You sit on the bench and take it in. There's no plaque, no legend. No temple priest would recognize this site as sacred, but it is. It feels like a memory that chose not to fade. And here's your historical fact for this moment. While official mythography was maintained by elite poets, priests, and scholars, many myths survived in oral fragments passed through families, midwives, and caretakers of sacred spaces. These versions were looser, more human, and sometimes more honest. And here's your quirky detail. One ancient Greek folktale recorded on a crumbling scroll in Egypt tells of a girl owl who lived in a cave and came out only to warn shepherds of incoming storms. The text refers to her as the Watcher in Shadow and insists she could speak just once each year, always to tell the truth and always in someone else's voice. Historians still argue whether that fragment reflects a lost myth, a superstition, or just a weirdly specific ghost story. But you don't need them to decide. You can feel it here. That echo of a girl who didn't want to be seen, but ended up being heard in 1,000 different forms. You rest your elbows on your knees and look at the owl carving for a while. It's not animated. It doesn't glow. It doesn't speak. And yet, something in its shape seems to shift with your breath. You stare into its eyes, and they don't offer answers. They reflect you. And in that, you realize something quietly profound. Maybe wisdom isn't about knowing more. Maybe it's about not needing to be known. Maybe it's about letting things be silent and still and seen anyway. The owl hoots softly from behind you. You turn to look, but she's perched just far enough away that her silhouette blends with the trees. Watching, not guarding, just being there. And you think about all the things that linger in the margins, names we forget, people we overlook, stories that don't make it into textbooks, all the moments that feel small in the moment, but echo forever in the background hum of history. Nyctimene wasn't a hero. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't even central to her own myth, according to some versions, but she was real. in that emotional, symbolic way that stories become when we sit with them long enough. You look up at the moon again. It's lower now, beginning its slow descent, brushing the tops of trees with silver fingers. The night is aging gently. And as you sit in that moment, a question floats to the surface, not demanding an answer, just curious. If you were offered the chance to disappear, to become something small and silent and eternal, would you take it? Not as punishment, not as exile, but as peace. Would you let your name drift away in exchange for the freedom to move unseen? Would you trade recognition for clarity? You don't answer. The owl wouldn't, either. But the question settles into your chest like a warm stone. And in the quiet, you smile, not because you've solved the myth, but because you've stopped needing to. You rise from the bench and walk once more, this time leaving no path behind, just soft prints in the grass, just presence, just enough. The forest path softens into meadow, and the night sky stretches wider above you, more stars now, spread like scattered coins across black velvet. You've been walking for hours, but there's no weight to your steps. Instead, there's a lightness, a clarity, like your body is adjusted to the rhythm of myth. The air hums with something ancient, but no longer distant. You're not just visiting this story anymore. You're inside it, ahead. The owl drifts low over the field, wings stretched wide and quiet. She doesn't look back. She doesn't have to. She knows you're still there. The path isn't marked, but it doesn't need to be. You follow your own memory now. Eventually, you come upon a strange little structure, a single standing doorway. No walls, no roof, just a stone arch, upright and sturdy, covered in moss and lichen, as if it sprouted from the earth rather than being built. Through it, the meadow continues uninterrupted. But the moment you step under it, everything changes. Not dramatically, not magically, just noticeably. The night is quieter, the stars brighter, and somewhere beneath it all, you feel that deep hum again. Not sound, not sensation, just presence. This is a threshold, not physical, but symbolic. You've crossed into the part of the myth that isn't written down. The part that only exists if someone listens. You sit down just beyond the arch, on a low flat stone that seems perfectly placed for reflection. The grass sways gently around you. The owl perches once more, this time on top of the arch itself. A living lintel for a story that's never needed walls. Here's your historical fact. Threshold markers, known as herms, were commonly placed in ancient Greek territories to denote sacred or liminal spaces. Some were stylized statues of Hermes. Others were simple stone markers. They weren't meant to block passage, but to signal transformation. Here, something changes. And your quirky detail. One minor inscription found near a ruined herm on the island of Paros reads, loosely translated, "The bird speaks truth beyond the doorway." but only to those who carry silence. Scholars have debated the translation for years, but most agree it refers to an owl, and possibly a forgotten ritual of listening at the edge of fields. You rest your elbows on your knees and let the air wrap around you like a shawl. The night is full, but not crowded. There's space here for questions, for echoes, for memory to stretch its wings. And as you sit, you feel the weight of a question settle softly beside you. A familiar one. It's been following you this whole journey, hasn't it? Did Nyctimene want to be remembered? Did she wish her story to be carved into coins, whispered at symposiums, or retold by strangers centuries later? Or did she simply want peace, her form quiet, her voice unclaimed, her name allowed to fade? Historians still argue whether the stories of transformed women were meant to offer them protection or to erase their power. But here, at the edge of a meadow watched by stars and owls, the question feels beside the point, because sometimes memory isn't about them, the ones remembered. It's about us, the ones who remember. You think of all the people who passed through this land before you, traders, farmers, scholars, wanderers, each catching a glimpse of an owl and thinking, perhaps, of a girl who vanished. Each leaving behind a token, a scratched symbol, a single name in passing. Nyctimene, not a scream, not a legend, just a name that fluttered across time and managed to land here. You lie back in the grass and stare upward. The owl remains on the arch, still and watchful, and you feel it, that subtle shift again, that feathered touch of understanding. She is not gone. She is not waiting. She is not asking anything of you. She is, and in that, there's peace. The wind picks up, just slightly, carrying the scent of earth and old herbs and something faintly metallic, like moonlight itself. The grass whispers against your skin, and you, in the stillness, understand something rare. The myth was never meant to dazzle. It was meant to stay, quietly, patiently, like an owl in the dark, watching until you learn how to see. The owl doesn't move. She's still perched on the stone archway, backlit by moonlight, her outline perfectly framed like a sigil or an emblem carved into the sky. You don't need her to move anymore. Her stillness is the answer. In a world that constantly demands noise, motion, explanation, she remains still. And that, somehow, feels revolutionary. You sit a while longer in the meadow, letting the cool breath of the night draw out your thoughts. There's nothing left to rush toward, no mystery waiting to be cracked open. This moment, quiet, contemplative, complete, is what the myth has been leading you to all along. Eventually, you rise, not with urgency, but with that soft, deliberate movement you use when leaving a sleeping room, not wanting to wake anyone. You pass once more under the archway, back into the grove, and the air changes again, not heavier, not darker, just real. You're back in the world of mortals now, But you've brought something with you. The owl flutters once, not to follow, but to mark the moment. A single beat of wings that seems to say, you came, you listened. That's enough. You begin walking again through thinner trees. The night is well advanced now, that special hour where even time seems drowsy. Your body knows it's late, but your mind doesn't care. You've become attuned to the story's rhythm now. A low, sleepy pulse. Not an ending, but a long exhale. And then, you arrive at a place you didn't expect. A crossroads. Not a metaphor, a literal one. Two paths veer off left and right, while the one behind you disappears into shadow. In the center, someone has built a small cairn, a stack of smooth, hand-sized stones. At its base is a small bowl, long since dried, but the faint crust of old oil and ash clings to the rim. A gesture of offering. You crouch beside it and brush the surface of one of the stones. There's a word there, etched faintly. You already know what it says. Nyctimene. She's here, too. Not in body, not in flight, but in the act of choosing paths. That's your historical fact. Crossroads were sacred spaces in ancient Greece, often dedicated to Hermes, Hecate, or unnamed spirits. Offerings were made at night, especially during new moons, to honor the deities who watched between decisions. And your quirky detail, in one odd fragment of a 3rd century B.C.E. poem, the narrator encounters a bird of no name perched on a cairn at a 3-way road. The bird speaks just once, offering no direction, only the word, look. And scholars dismiss the passage as metaphor. But you've been walking this path long enough to know better. You don't need a direction right now. You don't need instruction. You need to remember that she's in the choice itself. She didn't ask to be transformed, but she chose. Afterward, how to move, where to watch from, when to be seen. And so do you. You sit beside the cairn for a little while, letting the idea settle. That maybe stories like Nyctimene's aren't here to inspire awe or grief. Maybe they're just here to remind us that we get to decide how we are remembered. Or not remembered. That even the smallest names, whispered once at the edge of a ritual, can ripple forward through time in owl-shaped echoes. You rise and look down each path. One winds gently toward the edge of the forest, and the other curves upward toward the ridgeline. Both are soft with leaves, lit by moonlight. You pick one, not because it's right, not because it's better, because you can. And as you begin walking again, you feel something strange. Not release, not closure, but continuity. The sense that the story hasn't ended. It's just grown quiet, like an owl at rest, still watching, still there at you glance back one last time. The owl is gone now, when the cairn remains, and above you, in the trees, the leaves murmur something soft, like feathers brushing past each other in a dream. And the path winds gently upward now, rising toward higher ground, as the trees thin and starlight spills more freely across your steps. There's no owl this time, no mythic marker watching from a branch, and that absence feels intentional, not abandonment, but trust, like the myth is letting go of your hand, knowing you'll walk the rest of the way on your own. Each step carries the weight of everything you've seen. Shrines crumbling beneath vines, feathers caught in temple cracks, names whispered into bark. But now that weight feels light. Not a burden, a blessing. The kind you carry not to remember for others, but to remember as yourself. As you crest the ridge, a wide view opens before you, the forest stretching endlessly behind. And ahead, a rolling valley dusted in moonlight, distant hills folded like quiet thoughts. You sit down on a flat stone at the edge of the ridge and breathe in. From here, the story changes. This isn't the part of the myth you were told. This is the part that lives, the part passed from breath to breath, fire to fire, heart to heart. No written record, no dramatic poetry, just the soft shape of someone who once was, and always is. You close your eyes and listen to the valley. Nothing speaks, and that's the point. Here's your historical fact. The Greeks believed in miasma, spiritual pollution that clung to violence, injustice, or unchecked grief. Sacred rituals existed not just to honor gods, but to purify space, to restore balance. And yet, not all stories needed purification. Some were allowed to settle, to rest. That's what this feels like. Not a grand cleansing, just a settling. And your quirky detail? A fragment of a lost play by Euripides contains a single, isolated line. There are those the gods forget to remember, and so they become wind. Scholars call it incomplete, but you think it's complete enough. Because Nyctimene didn't need divine favor. She didn't need temples. She didn't need anyone to write a happy ending. She needed only to be allowed to be, to see, to vanish, and yet remain. And so here she is, in the trees, the coins, the forgotten rituals, the watchful pause before dawn. You wonder how many other myths have slipped through the cracks this way. How many other girls became animals, or rivers, or stars, told and retold until they became shorthand symbols instead of someone's breath. You wonder what it means to be turned into a symbol, and whether it's a second kind of forgetting. But you also know something else now. A symbol that is remembered, even dimly, still carries warmth. It glows in the dark. You open your eyes and find yourself staring at a small patch of wildflowers blooming at the cliff's edge, lavender and thyme. A few tiny white blossoms shaped like stars. You lean forward and gently pluck a sprig, not to keep, but to place beside you. You lay it on the stone and whisper, "For the girl who watched, not for Athena, not for scholars, for her." The breeze answers by lifting a few petals and sending them spinning upward like feathers. One brushes your cheek before disappearing into the night. And now you see the owl again, high above, wings stretched in a long, easy glide, not circling, not following, just flying. free, present, somewhere between night and story. You don't need her to land anymore. You've seen enough. The story doesn't end here. Not really. It simply fades into something softer, something that no longer needs to be explained. You rise from the stone, turn from the ridge, and begin walking again. No path, no destination, just motion, just presence, just the sound of your own feet pressing lightly into the earth. And as you walk, you feel the shape of the myth settle behind your ribs. Not like a burden, like wings. You walk now not towards something, but with something. An understanding that lingers like perfume on a letter or warmth on a seat just vacated. The night deepens. The stars above are no longer scattered. They're organized, somehow, forming invisible constellations not on any astronomer's map, but carved across the sky by emotion, memory, and myth. The trees begin to return as you descend the ridge, sparser, older, as though they've been waiting for this part of the story. Their trunks are streaked with moonlight, and between their branches, the wind hums gently. It carries no message, just presence, ahead. Something small and round catches your eye. A weathered fountain built into a hillside. Its stonework simple but elegant. Water trickles down its mossy face into a shallow basin. It looks like it hasn't been tended in centuries, and yet it still flows, quiet, consistent, alive. You kneel beside it, cupping water into your hands. It's cold, almost startling, but not unpleasant. The kind of cold that wakes without shocking. You sip. It tastes faintly of minerals and moss. Of earth remembering. Then you notice what's carved above the fountain spout. A single owl. Wings closed, perched serenely. No name, no inscription, just the bird. And you think, of course, she would be here too, watching even the waters. Here's your historical fact. In Greek lore, fountains and springs were sacred. Many were believed to be inhabited by nymphs, spirit guardians of fresh water. Pilgrims left offerings beside them, honey, flowers, simple jewelry. Some springs were said to grant visions, others forgetfulness. And your quirky detail, a fragmentary guidebook from the 2nd century CE mentions a hill spring on Lesbos where an owl once bathed and never flew again. The author writes it with puzzlement, unsure if it's a proverb, a myth, or a real story. He includes no context. But the phrasing feels familiar, doesn't it? You trail your fingers along the fountain's lip and sit back, letting the night air dry your palms. The forest behind you rustles softly, and for a moment, you imagine Nyctimene walking just a few steps behind, still owl-shaped, but human in posture, quiet, observant. Her eyes not accusing, not tragic, just knowing. You try to picture her before the myth, before feathers, before exile, before transformation. Not the moment she was changed, but the moment she asked to be. What did her voice sound like? Was it trembling, angry, Gentle? Or did she say nothing at all and let silence make the request? Historians still argue whether she spoke to Athena directly or simply prayed and was overheard. The myths differ. Some say Athena pitied her. Others say she admired her. Some even say she misunderstood the request and thought it was for flight, not disappearance. But you're beginning to realize that myths don't survive because they're accurate. They survive because they resonate. And Nyctimene resonates because she is still happening. She's in every moment someone chooses stillness over spotlight. In every person who finds refuge in silence. In every story that gets told sideways, softly, barely heard, and yet somehow stubbornly remembered. You lie back on the grass beside the fountain. The owl doesn't come. You don't need her to. The sound of water lulls you. The sky shifts slightly overhead. A pale sweep of cloud crossing in front of the moon, like a curtain gently drawn. You breathe deeply, the scent of damp stone and time washing over you. And you feel something warm, not physical, but emotional. A sense of permission. Permission to be quiet. Permission to be unseen. Permission to exist without explanation. It's not often that stories give you that. You close your eyes for a moment, and in the dark behind your lids, a new image rises. Not the owl, but the girl, not weeping, not afraid, just sitting, alone, listening to the trees, to the sky, to herself. And you realize this story, her story, isn't just about transformation. It's about listening deeply enough to choose what comes next. And now, you are listening too. When you open your eyes again, the sky has shifted. The stars feel just a little dimmer, the moon a little lower, like the world is gently preparing for dawn without making a big deal about it. Everything around you holds its breath, not in anticipation, but in acceptance. You rise slowly from the grass beside the fountain. The stone owl above the spout is now slick with dew, its carved feathers glinting faintly. You give it a small nod, because what else do you give a guardian who never asked to guard? Your feet carry you onward without planning. The forest opens into another meadow. But this one isn't wild. It's tended. Or rather, it was, centuries ago. You can see the faint, organized rows of what might have once been a garden, long overgrown. Yes, but the layout is still there, visible in the way the wildflowers form natural lines, the way the stones align underfoot. At the meadow's edge is a low stone bench, partially broken, nearly hidden by tall grass. You sit again, because this is a story that allows rest. And this is where you understand something vital, not just about Nyctimene, but about you. And anyone who's ever felt themselves slip into the background of their own life. She was never trying to become a bird. She was trying to stop being something else, being seen too sharply, judged too quickly, named too fast. She didn't want escape. She wanted change. And perhaps what she received was not perfect, but it was hers. Here's your historical fact. In Greek iconography, the owl eventually lost much of its association with sorrow or mystery and came to represent reason itself. By the classical period, it had become a shorthand for intelligence and order, thanks in large part to Athens and its clever rebranding of symbols. But here's your quirky detail. A 1st century Roman mosaic uncovered in modern-day Tunisia shows Athena seated on a throne. Owl on her shoulder, nothing unusual there, except the owl is blindfolded. No inscription explains it. No context is given. Just that image. A wise bird, unable to see. Historians still argue whether it was satire, symbolism, or a mosaicist's personal metaphor. But something about it feels truthful, because wisdom isn't always in what you see. Sometimes it's in what you choose to let go unseen. You lean back on the bench and scan the garden-turned meadow again. No statues, no coins, just that lingering hush of memory. A story that rooted here, long ago, and was never quite pulled out. You wonder who planted this place. Was it meant for Nyctimene? Or for someone else who simply knew what it felt like to disappear gently? Maybe it was built by women who weren't heroes or priestesses, just listeners, gardeners, midwives, quiet keepers of the margins, the kind of people who remember stories without needing to be credited for it, the kind of people who say, "Here, sit a while," and mean it. You pull a small wildflower from beside the bench. Nothing dramatic, just a plain white bloom. You place it on the stone and whisper the name one more time. Not as an invocation, not as a farewell, just as a confirmation. Nyctimene. The wind lifts through the meadow in response, not sudden, not loud. A brush of breeze that curls around your ankles, flutters your sleeves, then disappears into the trees. You think about how many girls in myth become something else. You think about how many of them we only remember for what they became. But you remember her now before that. You've seen her full shape, fragile, whole, lost, found, watching. Not the owl, the girl. And perhaps the owl, too, because the two are not separate. One watches, one waits, both endure, and so do you. The bench creaks faintly as you stand. No owl above, no feathers on the path, no symbols burned into the earth, just the memory of a quiet, necessary transformation, and the gift of having walked beside it. The meadow falls behind you like the last lines of a whispered poem, and you find yourself walking through the kind of quiet that feels earned, not empty, but complete. Your feet follow no visible path now. The forest has softened. It's no longer guiding you. It's accompanying you. The trees no longer lean in to listen. They walk beside you. Like old friends who've heard the story and simply want to keep you company as it fades into stillness. There's no owl overhead, and that doesn't worry you anymore. She was never meant to hover forever. She came when you needed her, stayed until you stopped needing answers, and then slipped into the night like a well-told tale. You pass under low branches and catch glimpses of the moon through the canopy. Thinner now, lower. A new day presses just beyond the hills, but for now, the world remains suspended in the hush of myth. Soon, you reach a flat expanse, just earth and moss and one massive standing stone, like a boundary marker between worlds. It's weathered, cracked, overgrown with lichen and ivy, but its shape is clear, tall, firm, final. You approach it slowly. There's no inscription on the front. But when you circle behind it, you find something carved low, almost at ground level, as if meant only for those who kneel to see it. It's a single line, barely legible. She watched and was enough. That's it. No name, no flourish, just the kind of quiet statement that doesn't need elaboration. And there it is. The truth Nyctimene may have carried all along. She didn't change the world. She didn't slay monsters or advise kings. She didn't become a hero, but she watched. She endured. She remained, and in doing so, she meant something. Here's your historical fact. Ancient inscriptions honoring unknown women, often servants, midwives, or priestesses, tend to be brief. A name, a role, a phrase like beloved by the household. Nothing dramatic, but their presence, archaeologists note, is everywhere. Embedded in homes, tucked into garden walls, scratched into the underside of amphorae, persistent, quiet, real. And your quirky detail. One grave stele found near Thebes bears the image of a seated woman holding a small bird in her lap. No name is given, just the words, "I watched while they slept." Theories abound. Nursemaid? Morning figure? Owl spirit? You don't need the stele explained. You recognize it, because it's her. And now, something in you softens, deeply. A little ache you didn't know you were carrying exhales and begins to dissolve. You kneel beside the stone and press your fingers to the carving. The moss is cool and damp. The stone holds warmth from the night air. You close your eyes, not to pray, just to be still. You think about how many stories end in silence, not because they are forgotten, but because they don't need to speak anymore. And then, very faintly, you hear it. Not from above, not from behind, but inside you. A sound that isn't a voice, but a presence. A memory that isn't yours, but has allowed you to hold it. A final, patient whisper. You may go now. And so, you do. You rise. Turn once more to look at the stone, then back to the trees. The wind sighs through the leaves. A single white feather drifts across your path and settles gently near your foot. Not a sign, just a punctuation mark. And with that, you walk on. No owl, no path. Just the steady rhythm of footsteps and the deep, comforting quiet of a story that no longer needs telling, because it was heard, because it was enough. And the forest floor is dappled with the faintest touch of silver now, not from the moon, which has dipped low behind the ridge, but from the earliest echo of dawn, still hidden, still gathering, but on its way. You walk in that in-between moment, when night has said goodbye, but morning hasn't quite arrived. The world is holding its breath, and you are walking through the pause. The path is barely visible now, marked only by instinct and that calm pulse you've carried with you since the first owl call. You're no longer searching. You're simply walking home through a story you've already understood. Ahead, the trees part around a wide clearing. In the center is a large, flat boulder, low to the ground, covered in old scratches and grooves. Not carvings, scraping. You step closer and run your hand over them. They aren't writing. They're marks, as if people have been coming here for centuries just to drag their hands across the surface, to feel connected, to leave something behind without leaving anything permanent. You sit at the edge of the boulder and lean back, letting the night cradle you. And you think, maybe stories don't need endings. Maybe some of them are just long, soft landings, like this. Here's your historical fact. Ancient myths were rarely told the same way twice. Each retelling adjusted details, names, outcomes, morals, to fit the moment. This fluidity wasn't seen as a flaw, but a strength. The story stayed alive because it changed. And here's your quirky detail. In one surviving children's primer from the Roman period, used to teach reading and memorization, there is a passage that begins, "Once, a girl prayed not to be seen." The next page is missing. Scholars assumed it was part of a larger, fabricated tale. But now, you're not so sure. Maybe the missing page wasn't lost. Maybe it was the point. Because not every name needs to be shouted. Some are meant to be carried, gently, in the folds of silence. And Nyctimene, she was always one of those. You lie back fully now, gazing up at the treetops. The stars are fading, one by one, like sleepy eyes closing. A single bird chirps once, hesitant, questioning. Another answers. Then quiet again. The hush is lifting. You take a long, steady breath and feel everything settle in place. The girl, the owl, the goddess, the silence, the watching, the waiting, the wings. You are no longer just the listener. You are the bearer of the memory, of the pause, of the presence. You rise one last time and press your palm to the boulder, adding nothing, taking nothing, just being. And then you step away, back into the world that hums and clicks and bustles, knowing that somewhere, high in a tree, tucked inside an old stone, or resting in the hollow of someone else's dream, the owl is still there. She watches, and because she watches, the story continues. Not loudly, not brightly, but truly. And that is enough. The air is changing now. It's subtle, the way all real changes are, like when a dream shifts into memory, or a candle burns down and you realize you've been sitting in the dark longer than you thought. There's a warmth at the edge of the breeze, and the sky above has gone from ink black to a deep, slow blue. You're approaching the liminal hour, the hour when myths fade and the world returns. But you haven't left the myth behind. Not really. It's come with you, nestled somewhere behind your ribs, soft as feathers and steady as breath. As you walk, you hear water again, different from the fountain's trickle, louder, widened. You follow it until you reach a shallow stream cutting through the forest floor, its surface glass smooth, catching the first hints of color above. There's a fallen log bridging the stream, worn flat by time and the countless feet that must have passed here. You cross it carefully, one step at a time, balancing not just your body, but everything you've gathered along the way. On the far bank, a narrow trail curves upward again. You follow it without question, your footsteps now more sure, even as the light shifts. Eventually, you reach the top of a gentle hill, and there, you see something you didn't expect. An old stone pedestal, no taller than your waist. And atop it, resting delicately in a carved hollow, is a single object, an owl-shaped mask. It's simple, terracotta, shaped by hand, smoothed but not glazed. The eyes are wide and round. The beak is small, understated. A cord lies curled behind it, brittle with age, but still intact. You reach for it slowly, and before you even touch it, you know, this wasn't meant to be worn for ceremony or drama. It wasn't a costume. It was a way of seeing. You lift it carefully. It's light. Almost absurdly so. And here's your historical fact. Masks were used in Greek rituals, not just in theater, but in initiation rites, storytelling, and even mourning. Some were meant to be worn only once, then buried or placed at sacred sites. They were not always about becoming someone else. Sometimes, they were about letting go of who you'd been. Your quirky detail, a fragment of a 6th century B.C.E. Traveler's Journal describes arriving in Lesbos during a festival of silent watchers, where hooded figures carried unmarked owl masks through the olive groves. No drums, no music, just walking, one foot after another, to remember the girl who vanished and saw too much, it says. Historians still argue whether the ritual ever existed. But standing here, holding this mask, you believe it. You don't put the mask on. You don't need to, because you already see differently. The mask was never the magic. The act of watching, that's the magic. Of choosing silence when the world clamors. Of remembering the things history footnotes and fairy tales cut short. Of honoring a girl who didn't become a goddess, or a martyr, or a lesson, just a bird, just a watcher, just a name that flutters behind coins and symbols and stories and shadows. Nyctimene. You place the mask back into its cradle and press 2 fingers gently to its brow. A blessing, a thank you. Then you turn from the pedestal and walk to the edge of the hill. And finally, you see the sun, just the rim of it, a faint blush behind distant trees. A single line of light arcs across the grass like a string pulled tight, and as it touches your feet, something within you lifts. The owl is gone. The feathers have settled. The grove is behind you. But the watching remains. You carry it now, not like a burden, like a lens, like a promise. You breathe in. The first breath of morning, and as the sunlight creeps higher, the story doesn't end. It settles. The sun rises slowly, casting a honey-colored glow over the hills, the trees, the old stones. Light touches everything, not like a spotlight, but like a blanket, warm, quiet, forgiving. It does not rush. It does not demand. It reveals. You stand at the hill's edge, letting the sunlight wrap itself around your shoulders like a cloak. You're not cold anymore. And not because the night has ended, but because the story has finished unfolding. You look down at the valley below, patches of forest, ribbons of mist, and hints of old paths vanishing into fields. Somewhere out there, the temple lies forgotten, the carved stones, the scratched owls, the garden, the pedestal, and that first feather you found in your hand. Long ago, when this journey began, you smile, not because you've uncovered a mystery, but because you've honored it. You didn't crack the myth open like an egg. You walked with it. You listened. And in return, it gave you something softer than certainty. It gave you presence. Here's your historical fact. Most ancient myths were not intended to be solved. They weren't puzzles. They were mirrors. Stories you carried with you, shaped by the road, by the listener, by the silence between retellings. That's why they survived. Not through accuracy, but through echo. And here's your quirky detail. One marginal note scribbled by a monk in a 12th century copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses reads, "The owl still cries, but not from trees, from hearts that see without being seen." No one knows who wrote it, just a fragment, tucked into the edge of parchment, now preserved in a dusty archive. But you know what it means, because you've heard her cry, not in grief, but in witness. You've stood where she stood, walked where she might have fled, and learned to see the world not through Athena's sharp judgment, but through Nyctimene's quiet clarity. You sit on the grass and let the warmth of morning reach your face. The sky is pale blue now, scattered with the last hints of night like gold flecks in a bowl of cream. You're tired, but not heavy. Your bones feel grounded. Your breath moves slowly, like wind through old leaves. And you understand, now, that not all transformations come with flash and feathers. Some happen quietly, gradually, feather by feather, until one day, you are no longer hiding. You're simply different, and that is enough. You rise once more, slowly, like the sun, and when you begin walking again, the earth feels softer. The trees don't lean in anymore. They simply sway. The birds have begun their morning conversations, some chirping, some cooing, some calling once and waiting for no reply. And somewhere above, just as you step onto a gravel path warmed by light, you hear it, a single owl call, high, soft, final. Not a warning, not a summons, just a note, a punctuation mark. You don't look up, you don't need to, you just nod, and with a full heart and empty hands, you keep walking toward the day, toward the ordinary, carrying the myth with you like a feather tucked behind your ear, not for protection, not for power, just so you never forget what it means to watch. The gravel path crunches gently beneath your feet, each step accompanied by the soft music of waking birds and the occasional flutter of wings overhead. The air is golden now, thick with dew and the low hum of a world stretching into morning. You no longer expect to see the owl. You no longer need signs, because you've become one. You're part of this landscape now. One more watcher among the trees. One more memory anchored in the hush between footsteps. You walk not with purpose, but with rhythm, like a verse in a song that only the dawn remembers. Soon, you come upon something unexpected, a small, square structure nestled into the hillside, half buried, half intact. It looks like a hut or shelter built of stone, roof long gone. The doorway is intact, though low, arched, shaped like an open mouth caught mid-breath. You duck inside. The air is cool, dry. The walls hold the scent of age and earth, stone warmed by thousands of sunsets and cooled by countless shadows. There's nothing here but a low stone shelf carved directly into the wall. And resting on it is a scroll, not parchment, just a tight, spiraled coil of bark bound with faded red thread. You untie it gently. Inside, no words, just a drawing, an owl, perched on a crescent moon, and beneath it, scratched so faintly you nearly miss it, a simple line. She sees the dark and stays. Not flies, not flees, stays. You sit with that. Let it settle, because so much of mythology is movement. Chase, escape, battle, flight. But Nyctimene did something quieter, braver, maybe. She stayed, in the shadow, in the silence, in the form she was given or asked for, or both. And in doing so, she taught the goddess of wisdom how to see. Here's your historical fact. Athena is often portrayed as distant, more reason than emotion, more law than mercy. But her choice of the owl, a nocturnal creature, solitary, quiet, misunderstood, suggests something deeper, a kind of wisdom born not of triumph, but of observation. And your quirky detail? In a minor myth variant written on a clay tablet now housed in a Cypriot museum. There's a mention of a maiden owl who sits atop Athena's shield during council meetings, not as a symbol, but as a listener. She never speaks, she only blinks. And when she blinks twice, decisions are said to change. The scholars call it allegory. You call it memory. You roll the bark scroll closed again and place it back on the shelf. Not because it belongs there, but because it wants to remain. Not every truth needs to be carried outward. Some are meant to stay rooted. As you leave the shelter, the sun has fully risen. The trees are glowing now, gold-edged with green, and the earth is warming beneath you. You walk slowly, gently, as if the world is just woken and you don't want to disturb it. But there's one last moment waiting for you. You round a bend and see a clearing filled with pale stones arranged in circles, old, worn, mostly toppled. Not a cemetery, not a monument, just place. And in the center, a pedestal, cracked but upright, and on it, a stone carving of an owl. Not Athena's owl, Nyctimene's. She's not majestic, not menacing, just present, perched, watching. You approach and see that someone, long ago, or maybe not so long, has placed a handful of feathers at the base. Not arranged, just offered. You kneel beside the pedestal and add one more thing. Not a feather, not a flower, just a breath. You exhale slowly, and in that breath, you place everything. The walk, the story, the silence, the seeing. You don't speak. You don't need to, because she's still watching. And now, so are you. The clearing is quiet, even with morning fully arrived. The air carries warmth now, but not yet heat. Sunlight dapples the stones, catching dew and turning each feather at the base of the pedestal into tiny prisms, glistening, trembling just slightly in the breeze. You stay for a while, not because you're waiting for something to happen, but because you know that nothing needs to. This is the final pause, the last hush, and in this hush, you feel her most clearly. Not hovering, not speaking, just being. Not a ghost, not a warning, not a monument. A girl who became an owl, who became a symbol, who became a memory. And now, she is part of you. You step back slowly, giving the stones their space. One last glance at the pedestal, and then you begin to walk again, back toward the trees, down the winding path that somehow now feels familiar, though you've never walked it before. Or maybe you've just become fluent in this kind of quiet. As the path leads you through the forest, something settles over you. Not exhaustion, not sadness, peace. You think again of all the transformations you've passed on this journey. Some forgotten, some misremembered, some stolen by bigger myths. But Nyctimene was different. She didn't become a hero. She didn't die a tragic death. She wasn't punished for pride. She simply became, and then kept watching. Here's your final historical fact. In late classical art, Athena's owl was sometimes depicted with closed wings, not in flight, but at rest, perched, composed, always alert. It was not the dramatized, wide-winged creature of fear or majesty, but a patient, grounded sentinel. It was never explained why. And here's your final quirky detail. In a single surviving fresco fragment from an Aegean villa, there's an owl painted without eyes, just blank ovals. The caption beneath reads, "It sees in the dark." A paradox, a riddle, a quiet reminder that sometimes the deepest wisdom is carried by those who do not look with eyes at all, but with memory. You reach the edge of the forest now. The trees open to sky, and before you stretches the waking world. Fields touched by sun, a distant road, the sound of water somewhere nearby. You step from the shade into the light. And the story, at last, steps with you. It does not end here. It simply quiets. Like the final note of a lullaby. Like the moment you close a book and keep thinking anyway. You carry her with you, not as a symbol, not as a sorrow, but as a kind of seeing. And in this light, soft and golden, she is not a warning or a shadow. She is the part of you that watches, the part that listens, the part that knows how to vanish when needed, and how to return when the world is ready. You are not leaving her. You are her. And so, as the first breeze of true morning brushes your face, you smile. Not because the myth is over, but because you were invited to walk with it. And you did. You were quiet. You were patient. You were present. And that, in the end, is the whole story. Now, as the sun climbs higher and the story fades behind your steps, let everything slow. Let your breath become soft and quiet, like the hush beneath trees before a stormless dawn. You're not thinking anymore. You're drifting. The forest, the owl, the girl, they've all taken their place in the background now, like the last traces of a dream before waking. And you, peaceful, grounded, carry none of it as burden, only as memory. If your eyes are still open, let them close. If your hands are clenched, let them go slack. If your thoughts are circling, let them land. There is nothing left to chase. Nyctimene's wings are folded now. The owl is still. The girl is safe. The myth has ended, not with thunder or revelation, but with a breath, a gentle one, like yours. So now, lie still. Let the edges of your body blur into the bed, into the room, into the quiet world beyond your walls. Let your heartbeat become the only rhythm you hear. There's nothing more to understand, nothing left to solve. Only this: you walked the whole story. You heard what needed hearing. You watched long enough for silence to become meaning. And now you sleep. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.